is the 41st millennium, a time that is said to be host to the most bloody regime imaginable, where war is all everyone knows, fighting on behalf of their precious Emperor of Mankind, who sits on his golden throne of Earth, commanding his forces on a quest to unite the worlds under his own might. Wars are brutal and gigantic in scale all over the galaxy, as battle fleets rage across the stars, taking on a multitude of enemies from the horrifying orcs to the hive mind-controlled Xenos warriors, and even those that have gone against their holy emperor are now fight as traitors against the people they once called their brothers. Fighting as the emperor's right hand and almost golden forces are his genetically engineered soldiers made from the DNA of his own chosen Primarchs, who they themselves are made from the emperor's own genetic samples. These warriors are known as the Adeptus Astartes, also known as the Space Marines, who are essentially the most deadly super warriors that currently exist for mankind. Utilizing some of the best engineered weaponry and armor from the forges, these troops are sent in to turn the tides of war, allowing humanity to be victorious even if it looks like defeat is inevitable. They're so renowned all over that the regular humans fighting on the front lines consider them as angels looking over them, as to them the Emperor protects, something that they live by on a day-to-day basis. With these Space Marines being created and used in the Emperor's galactic conflict, consist 20 factions of these warriors, all displaying unique symbols, colors and equipment to help them stand out on the battlefield, as well as influence the battle in their own unique way. Some of the Space Marines that are considered the best of the best are known as the Ultramarines, also known as the Warborn, who were seen as the warriors who saved humanity during a dark period in their war campaign known as the Horus Heresy, and are also seen as the most important imperial organization on the Eastern Front. So who are the Ultramarines? Where do they stem from? How did they come to be? And what have they been doing during this time of war? Well, in today's episode, we will be exploring the origins of these famous warriors donning the colors of blue, white and gold, and what they bring to the Imperium of Man, from their creation all the way up to the Horus Heresy, which we will cover in another video, as their timeline is insanely long. And also, spoiler warning, some of the footage in this video will be from Space Marine 2, so if you don't want to know what happens within the game, maybe just listen to the audio version up on Spotify now. But without further ado, this is the story of the 13th Astartes Legion, known as the Ultramarines, Part 1, their creation and early history. Our story of the Ultramarines begins way before their creation during a time known as the Unification Wars, or Wars of Unification, in the 29th and 30th millennium. These conflicts, which will be explored at a later time on this channel, were essentially triggered by the Emperor of Humanity, who was trying to unify all of the shattered tribes and nations of Terra, the planet that was once known as Earth. At the helm of his forces, the Emperor would send forth a troop known as the Thunder Warriors, who had been genetically engineered within secret laboratories. These warriors were massive in stature, made to look like walking tanks on the battlefield that would walk alongside their emperor, being commanded by their highest ranking commander that would be known as a Primarch, who looked identical to their lower ranking warriors, something vastly different to what happens with the Astartes later. Alongside this, like with the Space Marines, the Thunder Warriors also were a part of their own unique legions, 20 to be exact, all helping them stand out and able to have different legions sent all over Terra. As the Unification War continued on, the Emperor was eventually successful in uniting all of Terra for the first time in millennia, and finally the Emperor could sit on his throne to rule over all. It was said in the records that unfortunately in the final battle of this Unification War, at the Battle of Mount Ararat, all of the Thunder Warriors would be wiped out, making sure that their sacrifice allowed the Emperor to be successful. However, the truth of it was that these warriors were flawed, and their downfall was remembered by an actual surviving Thunder Warrior named Arik Tyrannus. Whilst they were incredibly powerful, and I mean incredibly powerful, fast and really well equipped, they were essentially insane or were quickly losing their sanity thanks to their gene degradation, which would also make them extremely violent and suffering in numbers, with many dying in battle or by gene degradation and not being replenished at all. In the end, the Emperor decided that these Thunder Warriors were not stable enough, as he also had other troops that were stable, and because of it, supposedly massacred all of them at the Battle of Mount Ararat, a battle that was completely unnecessary and just an excuse to send them into essentially their deaths, giving him an excuse to reset his new program and create the next line in Super Warriors, the 2.0 version, if you will. Fleeing from this, Arik would be able to find a cure for the gene degradation, but unfortunately for most of his Thunder Warrior brothers, it was far too late. It was now time for a new era in the Emperor's plans. In his planning, the Emperor would state his intentions for what he wanted from these new warriors, saying, "They shall be my finest warriors, these men who give themselves to me. Like clay I shall mold them, and in the furnace of war forge them. They will be of iron will and steely muscle. In great armor shall I clad them, and with the mightiest guns will they be armed. They will be untouched by plague or disease. No sickness will blight them. They will have tactics, strategies, and machines such that no foe can best them in battle. They are my bulwark against the terror. They are the defenders of humanity. They are my Space Marines, and they shall know no fear." Now with the Thunder Warriors out of the picture and their history changed to make it look like they all died as heroes, the Emperor's forces started perfecting the gene integration process, making it so the next force made from this process was still Super Warriors, albeit a little bit weaker than their predecessors, but much more stable and easier to make more and more to fight on the front lines. Utilizing individual germ cells known as gene seeds, these would be isolated and genetically modified, being used to make specific new organs to be placed inside of these warriors. During this same time, the Emperor would also bring together a collection of godlike beings known as Primarchs who housed tons of new powers far greater than any humans around. These beings were also a part of the Emperor's experiments, one of the most top secret ones on Terra, as they also utilized arcane lore from the psychic dimension that paralleled their own, known as the Warp. With the Primarchs now created but their own experiments now aborted in the process, the Emperor's team of the biotechnical division got to work, taking samples of the Primarch's fetal genetic material and turning it into the said gene seed, allowing for the creation of the 20 different Space Marine legions to be perfected and created. With that, the Emperor had done it. He had found a successful warrior to replace the Thunder Warriors from the Unification War that could be replaced easier, but whilst not as powerful, was still incredibly brutal in combat and exactly what he needed for his galactic campaign. For the Ultramarines, these would be the 13th Legion of the 20 made by the Gene Seed, as they would brandish the Roman numeral mark on them when going into battle, when they were first created anyway. Their Gene Seed is seen as being one of the most stable out of all of the other Space Marines, with it only having a 10% chance of mutation. This allows the Gene Seed to utilize every organ and implant possible without any real worry of a mutation or a defect. It's also said that it does not really degrade over time, allowing these warriors to keep fighting at a high level for generations. That said, they are known for becoming extremely aggressive at times because of the way their genetics work, and on top of that are much easier to corrupt and take to a path of heresy. Early on in their recruitment process of making these Ultramarines, the recruits would come from the sub-equatorial Meglev clans of Panpokro, the war families of the Saragon Enclave, the Midifric Hive oligarchy, and the anthropophagic tribes of the Caucasian wastes on Terra. This allowed the Ultramarines to have an extremely diverse group of individuals from different cultures representing them. But the other reason were because they were some of the fiercest to fight against within the Unification War, where for them, surrender was never an option. They would keep fighting endlessly until they were either wiped out or left as just a few refugees, brought into the Emperor's will by sheer force. They were seen as the best for this role as the Emperor's super warriors after the Unification War, as they only saw victory or death. Whilst the process of recruiting and making these Ultramarines did begin in the late stages of the war, they were fully ready for action after it had come to an end, meaning that in the massive war on Terra, the Ultramarines never fought in it. In fact, their first battles came during the liberation of the solar system, when the Emperor took his forces to the stars to begin his great crusade. Once that conquest had begun, the Ultramarines became known to many many as the Warborn, which was in reference to those who were original members, survivors of the Terror War, and people who had been molded into who they are because of it. Because of this, it will be no surprise that they were part of the first battle of the Great Crusade, which was part of the liberation of the solar system, known as the First Pacification of Luna, as the Emperor took military action to remove the gene cult who lived on the surface, trying to shape their vision of what humanity should be. Along with the Imperial Fists and Sons of Horus, these troops would be victorious as they overwhelmed the Selenar forces, bringing their end on Luna. However, the Selenar's hatred for the Emperor continued on for many years after. As well as this, they also took part in the Sedna campaign along with 8 other Space Marine legions as they were sent into what was labelled as False World of Sedna on the far reaches of the Sol system, beyond the orbit of the dwarf planet Pluto, to take out the Xenos aliens living there. This was a major success as the Xenos were taken out through the use of unknown psychic means. Soon after this, the Ultramarines would also go on to be successful in forcing the Osiris cluster into compliance in what was said to be a highly successful campaign. However, soon after that campaign, the whole region would fall to mass waves of rebellion, causing the Legion to take quick action, focusing on the world of Septus 12 and its hive city of Cabasset, where the rebellion was rampant. Venturing in, however, the Legion would be ambushed by an unexpected Xenos fleet showing up from the planet's giant star. These Xenos were unlike any witnessed before and sent the Legion into a panic, trying to desperately get to the surface and somehow fight off not just the new Xenos forces, but the rebelling humans as well. Ultimately, the battle was a complete failure for the Legion, as they would go on to lose 6,500 Astartes in the battle, making it their bloodiest defeat, and still to this day is the worst in their Great Crusade campaign. Despite that brutal defeat for the Ultramarines, in the year of 833 of the 30th millennium, the strength of them had risen to 33,000, making them an extremely formidable force, but their morale and pride was at an all-time low, as they had been majorly harmed by what had happened over within the Osiris cluster and how many they had lost in the Osiris rebellion. It was time for them to try and regroup and find a way to make their Legion go back to the fierce warborn warriors they were when they were first created by their Primarch's gene seed. Our story of the Ultramarines moves to an individual that would be known as Roboute Guilliman, a Primarch of the Emperor of Mankind formed from his own genes. Guilliman, when he was an infant, was, like many other Primarchs, taken as an infant by the powers of chaos and flung out into the rest of the galaxy. Chaos being a psychic energy that was formed from all of the dark emotions from mortals within the main reality where humanity lives. These emotions range from anger, hatred, despite, basically anything that can cause chaos, hence the name. A terrifying idea that a being can be influenced by these deadly forces and turned into terrifying creations. That said, some humans can harness these psychic powers and turn them into powerful warriors for humanity, these being known as psykers. However, most of these individuals are most likely going to be corrupted by chaos at some point, as it will eventually taint their mind and body. With that said, with Guilliman being taken by the power of chaos as an infant, he would be removed to a far-away world to try and prevent the upcoming age of the Imperium. As Guilliman's capsule flew through the skies, it would eventually fall into one of humanity's lost colonies known as Macragge, where it would be found by a group of hunters in a forest and taken back to their consul known as Connor, who was one of the 2 rulers of this colony, and the reason it was taken back was because the hunters had witnessed the capsule was holding a child that was glowing and surrounded by a mysterious aura. After that initial encounter with this unique child, Connor would go on to take in Guilliman and would go on to name him as Roboute. It didn't take long before the people of Macragge realized this child was a prodigy, as he would grow extremely fast in both body and mind. At just the age of 10, he had learnt everything possible, taught by some of the eldest and wisest people within Macragge, but to him, he had learned everything, be that history, philosophy or science, in just a few years. Noticing his adopted son was something special, Connor would go on to send him out on an expeditionary force to Illyrium, a mountainous region in the far north of Macragge, putting him in command of it. Within this region, tons of wild men would be there terrorizing the civilized regions, and despite all of their efforts with the military, none would be successful. That was until Roboute took his own expedition into it, it, where he was proved to be something special, putting up a great fight and earning the respect of the wild men who would lay down their arms and never threaten the civilized areas ever again. After that was done, Roboute would return to his home city to find it in utter chaos, as his father's co-consul, Guilliman, would launch a coup attempt to take full power for himself and his faction of nobles who enjoyed a life of luxury, utilizing slaves as their main military strength, contrasting the more democratic view of Connor, who was seen as the more popular leader. As Roboute got closer to the city, Guilliman's men were overwhelming the soldiers of Connor's forces, and the consul house was fully under siege. Splitting from his forces, which he ordered to help the city guards, Roboute rushed to the consul house to lift the siege and try to save his father. Whilst he was successful in lifting the siege, he would go on to find his father close to death, surrounded by his bodyguards. Unfortunately, Connor did not make it, explaining every little detail to his son about who it was who assassinated him and who launched this rebellion in the first place. With that information, and after witnessing the man who raised him die in front of his very eyes, Roboute took to shutting down the rebellion himself and was highly successful, destroying Guilliman's reign of terror, and with him now out of the question and his father also gone as well, Roboute would take over the whole of Macragge and assume the title of sole consul of this colony. Now with this new role, he would go on to set out what his father stood for and put it into action, punishing treachery every chance he could, which included Guilliman and his loyalists, who were executed soon after these events, with their lands and wealth being given back to the common people. Utilizing his superhuman strength and mental capabilities, Roboute completely flipped Macragge's society into something amazing, changing its social structure, creating a meritocracy where office and honors were given to the hard-working rather than the wealthy and influential, and ultimately made Macragge incredibly prosperous for everyone living there. Whilst this was going on, and just prior to it, the Emperor of Mankind and his armies were just around the corner, making it to the neighboring planet of Espandor. Whilst there, the Emperor would go on to hear stories about the child of the consul Connor, who was said to be incredibly strong, intelligent, and different to everyone there. And with all of that information gathered, it became clear to the Emperor that he had found one of his lost Primarchs that had been scattered by the chaos at birth. He had located one of his lost sons. Before he could do anything about Roboute, the Emperor and his forces would be hit by an unexpected warp storm, throwing his holy ship off course, making their journey to Macragge take much longer. And whilst they got there in the end, the Emperor would go on to find that Roboute had been ruling it for at least 5 years. Landing on the world, the Emperor would go on to be utterly amazed at how self-sufficient and prosperous this society had become. And on top of that, how strong and well equipped the military there was, frequently trading with nearby systems as well. Knowing this was a perfect world for his campaign, the Emperor would go on to assign Roboute as the commander of the Ultramarines Legion, seeing how effective he had become, not just in combat, but also in building a society, and with that assignment, also relocated the Legion's forward base to Macragge. With the appointment of Guilliman as the Legion's new Primarch, there was little he had to learn about how they worked or the wider galaxy around him. He was immediately able to begin his new role as their leader, and because of how good he was at organizing and stabilizing societies and people, thanks to the way he had been raised by his father Connor, the Ultramarines were liberated with a great sense of pride and honor, as they were all treated with respect by this new brilliant leader. Not only did he give them a new sense of purpose, Guilliman also showed his plans for the future and righteousness of the Great Crusade, which once again renewed the morale of the Ultramarines and got rid of any doubts they had about him being their new Primarch. But Guilliman needed to do more than just command them. He needed to make these warriors something truly special, a group of individuals that could shape the Great Crusade and bring ultimate power to the Emperor. He wanted this group to be one filled with strength of the body, honor for their brothers and their Emperor, and one filled with order and self-sustaining power for conquest and expansion. Guilliman always believed that a military force was more than just warriors wielding arms. It was their chain of supply, the starships which carried them, the manufactoria that made everything for them, as well as the worlds which bred all of their new recruits. Everyone who played a part in their conquest was vital, and Guilliman made that known to everyone under his command, so they could all work together for the good of the Emperor. Not only that, but he also turned the whole force of his into an extremely effective effective meritocratic one, where the hardest working individuals would be rewarded for their service, turning them into an extremely regimented yet effective legion, with some of the best individuals running them as they had all worked extremely hard to get where they were. Beneath Guilliman at the helm were chapter masters who would go on to lead approximately 10,000 warriors and segments of the legion fleet. Under that, there would be chapters divided into 10 companies of 1,000 men under the command of a captain, and at this time in their Great Crusade history housed several special forces that would be named the Invactari, Fulmentari, Locutari, and Evoceti. To finalize their command, there would also be senior positions known as the Four Tetrarchs, as well as legates and legatus, who would oversee the large battle forces. Now with his new military force shaped to his design and all of the roles set in stone, his next goal was to unite all of the worlds Macragge had maintained links with over the many years and use them all as a network to get things done. This would start the new era of Roboute Guilliman's realm of Ultramar, something that would be solar decades in the making and would just keep expanding for years on end. The Ultramarines had a new sense of life with their new appointed Primarch at the helm, and that was helped even further as Guilliman would look to boost their morale even further and erase the shame of their previous defeat out within the Osarian cluster during the active rebellion there, where they were ambushed by the mysterious Xenos Cybrids, which are essentially highly psychic Xenos warriors. The Ultramarines would spend years searching for these Cybrids and their oddly shaped hourglass vessels, which captured and mentally enslaved other species such as humans and orcs. And finally, after years of searching led by Guilliman, the Ultramarines were able to track the Cybrids at the Eurydice terminal after another Space Marine Legion known as the Warhounds confronted them whilst they were fighting against the orcs from the Glaucian Empire. With these Cybrids located, the Ultramarines rushed in to get their revenge. As they got there though, the whole system had been turned into a radioactive battleground, with a few Cybrid vessels being attacked by the orcs, and luckily even some of the Warhounds surviving on their battle cruiser known as the Cold Cerberus. After aiding the Warhounds, being told everything about what had happened, the Ultramarines fully relieved all of them, stating the battle would now be theirs alone. Guilliman had a vast knowledge of these psychic creatures and knew exactly how he was going to be able to take them on, and that was by only focusing on them as opposed to any of their psychically enslaved forces. Taking the Xenos out would mean their troops would fall as well. With that plan set up, Guilliman led the attack into the alien vessels and were met with vicious resistance from the Cybrids, who were said to fight with the severity of caged animals. Alongside Guilliman were the Invictari Terminators, who also charged headfirst into the alien vessels to end them once and for all. Unsurprisingly to everyone, it would be their Primarch who would be the one to breach into the innermost chamber of the largest hourglass ship of the Xenos to find the master of all of the Cybrids. This disgusting thing would be 3 times the height of Guilliman with many limbs attached to it as it screamed out shockwaves of ceramite breaking force. Luckily for the Primarch, he would be protected from these psychic abilities thanks to the Ultramarines librarian known as Ptolemy, who sacrificed himself to save the Primarch, giving him the perfect opportunity to rip the Xenos into pieces, ending their reign of terror once and for all. With the Master wiped out by the Primarch, the other hourglass vessels also fell one by one along with their enslaved armies. Sadly, in this final battle against an enemy that once embarrassed them and caused them to go into an extremely low period in their history, they would still go on to lose thousands of their brothers as they were desperate to extract their revenge, but their sacrifices were worth it, as the Cybrids from Osiren were finally destroyed, with their new Primarch restoring that morale that had been lost back before they had been assigned with his command. This event helped the Ultramarines to become that formidable foe within the Emperor's Great Crusade, as they would go on to be the legion who conquered most worlds during their campaign, with the exception of the other legion known as the Lunar Wolves. The Ultramarines didn't just conquest them with their sheer strength, they were also one of the fastest to turn worlds around and make them part of the Empire, and on top of that, also left them in a really good state after they had conquered them, turning those worlds into something great and useful to the cause. This This was once again thanks to Guilliman's command, as he would not move on to another world until the world they had just conquered had been fully set up with tons of defenses to make sure it would be held from any further attacks or counterattacks from the enemy just defeated. He would also leave behind advisors who would be able to create industries and set up trade routes with the rest of the Imperium, meaning that these worlds weren't just barren war-torn up lands, they were now fully prosperous, where their well-being of the people would be at the forefront of their thinking, similar to what he had done when he became the sole consul on the Ultramarines' home planet. This just helped build up that realm of Ultramar that Guilliman was so keen on building up over the many years, and throughout the Great Crusade, it just kept getting bigger and bigger thanks to his genius actions in commanding his troops and setting up effective governments within those liberated planets. With this all happening over the galaxy, with Ultramar growing into its own small empire of its own, Guilliman also wanted to focus the military machine around their home planet of Macragge that would allow the Ultramarines to have a steady flow of new recruits. This allowed for the Ultramarines to grow substantially as new recruits located from this colony were being pumped into the rest of the forces extremely fast. And on top of that, the ones out there fighting within the Great Crusade weren't really suffering any major casualties, meaning that their military might was absolutely huge, becoming the largest of all of the Space Marine legions. This meant things had to be changed within the overall structure of this legion, as the Ultramarines would be put into what was known as chapters, normally ranging from around 10, but the Ultramarines at this point in time had at least 25 chapters. By this point in the Ultramarines timeline, the Legion was numbered around 250,000 Space Marines, and it seemed like nothing was ever going to slow down this small empire inside of the much larger empire ruled by the Holy Emperor of mankind. The Ultramarines under the leadership of their Primarch were formidable, and thanks to his knowledge of pretty much everything within the galaxy, no matter what they faced, there was always a solution and a weak point for their enemy that they could exploit. For the Emperor, he was winning massively, and it was a glorious thing to witness these genetically created warriors that were not only winning battles and liberating planets under his name, but they were also extremely disciplined and had been taught the ways of honor and strength, as well as looking after everyone within their military, from the lowly workers in the factories to the people running the transport. Everyone served their part in the great journey, and the Ultramarine society was at the forefront of it all. However, this is where the Ultramarines' peak would come to an end, as another Primarch under the name of Horus would go on to declare his treachery against the Holy Emperor and plunge the whole of his Great Crusade plans into chaos. Before he made that claim, however, Horus would go on to send a message to the Ultramarines, telling them to all assemble for war in the Viridian system, claiming that it was under attack by an Orc invasion force from the Galaxy Empire. With those communications coming through, it was clear that Ultramar was close enough to be effective in the assault against the Viridian, and with that, Guilliman ordered his legion to assemble in the Calth system. What happened after would trigger the events of the Horus Heresy, and the last time we would see the Ultramarines travel with a force of 250,000 warriors. But that will have to be a subject for part 2 in the Ultramarines story. For now, this has been the story of their creation and their early history going from the Thunder Warriors into the Space Marines, and their transformation into the formidable Ultramarines Legion under the leadership of their Primarch, Roboute Guilliman. Until part 2, I want to say a massive thank you for watching, and I hope you all enjoy this Warhammer 40k lore dive. I'd love to do more of these as I adore this universe so much, and there's so much to cover, so please do like, subscribe if you haven't already, and give it a comment to let me know if you'd like to see more, or if you just like this video in general. A big thanks to my patrons for supporting me and allowing me to make these videos for a living, including my small fishes, my big fishes, Nox, Vox and Greg, my YouTube channel Wise Ones, Video Gamer 75, Sith Lord 906, and RIP City, my sharks, Nata Park, Jason X117, Jack T and Alfred Correa, and my massive megalodons, Sinus and Hazy Thoughts. But that is all for now. Thank you for watching again, and I shall see you out there fighting for our Holy Emperor. Emperor protects. Cheers.